Hello, good morning. Welcome to the Dailies, where we keep you updated with some of the happenings from the front page of the Nigerian newspaper. I am Sana Elisha Dasha. Please do well drop your comment, drop your views concerning some of the stories we will be going through from the papers. And I'll be doing this program alongside Rachel Tanzi. Good morning.
Morning, Sele.
All right, let's go through some of the papers and we'll be starting with New Nigerian newspaper.
On New Nigerian, Tom Polo accuses Navy of hindering fight against oil theft, calls for support. Kareto attack, Borno stands with armed forces, statement from Governor Zulum. 3.5 billion people still practice open defecation worldwide. This is coming from Oyo RUWASSA chairman. The big story on the paper, Ubasani, a unique leader in Nigeria's complex political landscape. A statement from Vice President Shatima. The writer says SABMF roundtable attracts prominent leaders and policy makers. Still on the paper, Gombe governor presents 320 billion naira budget proposal for 2025. Earmarks 65% for capital projects, 35% for recurrent expenditure. 2025 budget prioritizes education, health, agriculture, infrastructure, human capital, and others. House assures swift passage. You can find details on page 8 of New Nigerian. SEMA repatriates Borno citizens from Chad Republic, provides 20,000 naira token to beneficiaries. Kaduna communities celebrate restoration of power supply after 2 years blackout. You can find details on page 3. And we have a picture of Governor Momodu Yahaya laying the 2025 budget proposal before the Gombe State House of Assembly. That is the 320 billion naira budget proposal. And that's all the news on New Nigerian.
All right, take a look at the Punch newspaper. APC PDP governors disagree over oil revenue sharing, with detail found on page 2. Dangote refinery begins petrol export to West African nations. AG uncovers 4.6 billion unapproved spending in Umahi's ministry. You can read detail of that on page 21. 5 soldiers, 50 terrorists killed. All right, yes, we have 5 soldiers, 50 terrorists killed, NSCDC agent missing in Borno and Niger. More detail found on page 19. PDP crisis, Damagum to remain chair as the National Working Committee and state chairman meet. Pro-Wike governors insist on keeping Damagum till October 2025 as NEC meeting tops agenda. We have tribute as Senate holds validatory session for late Umba. You can read more detail of that on page 11. Ajayi heads to court as Ayeda Tiwa gets certificate of return. 4 UK-based Nigerian students jailed over street fight. You can do well to read that on page 4 and 5. Agent petition NCAA as foreign airlines sell tickets in dollars. You can find that on page 22. And that's all on the Punch newspaper.
On Daily Sun newspaper, Mba identifies missing link in educational system. Nigeria orders to benefit from $1 trillion global warming mitigation fund. You can start with the details on the front page. The big story on the paper, federal government seeks fresh $2.2 billion loan, minimum wage hike to swell federal government personnel and pension costs by 3.29 trillion naira in 2025. Appeal court upholds 30 million naira damages against Ondo government and Omotekun. You can find details on page 4. On oil theft, Tom Polo accuses Navy of involvement in illegal oil bunkering. Senate pays tribute to late Ifeanyi. You can find details on page 26. Doctors begin nationwide strike. You can find details on page 25. And then we have a picture November 2024 G20 Rio Summit, where we can see President Bola Ahmed Tinubu 6th ride on back row with other leaders of the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty during the G20 Leaders Summit at Museum of Modern Art in Rio, Brazil. That's all news on Daily Sun newspaper.
All right, let's take a look at another paper, which is the Vanguard newspaper. Concerning remittance, CBN cautioned public on use of fake SWIFT messages. More detail found on page 19. Nigerians' growth will come from human capital development, not physical asset, coming from Governor Mba. Not development central to Nigerians' prosperity. This is coming from President Tinubu. And concerning World Toilet Day, about 95 million Nigerians lack access to basic sanitation service. This is a report coming from UNICEF, where we have Shaitima to governors work towards ending open defecation, and we've seen the number from the first paper we took this morning, where we are having about 3.5 billion people still practicing this, not just in Nigeria but worldwide. And today being the World Toilet Day, I think it's more emphasis needs to be there, where we have landlords and people who are actually, when you are building a house, please make sure you have provision for a restroom for the people who are residing in your houses, so that we can actually reduce the illness. And we're having various outbreak of illnesses coming up. We're having malaria, typhoid, and many others as well. You can read more detail of that on page 13. Still on Vanguard newspaper, the big story: expert warn as Tinubu seek approval for $2.2 billion fresh loans. The writer says forwards 2025-2027 MTEF FSP for approval. Experts raise alarm over fiscal fragility, and then we have effect of fresh borrowing is likely to be devastating for the economy. This is coming from Adori. How the loan will be repaid is necessary, coming from Professor Waleke. And then we have economy impact depends on how it is utilized. You can read detail of all these on page 24. We have Nigeria can afford to lag behind. Shaitima and Sanwo-Olu are saying this concerning the economy of the country. Ukraine fires 6 U.S. long-range missiles at Russia. Long-range missiles signifies doctrine stiff, coming from ex-envoy. You can find that on page 8. Prolonged power outage worsen hardship in the Niger Delta. That's a story you can find on page 5. Presidency clarifies spokesman status. You can read that on page 8. Ajayi reject result, heads to court concerning the Ondo Guber election. We have the picture story where we can see the Director General World Trade Organization, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, his wife Oluremi, and the President of African Development Bank, Dr. Akiwumi Adesina, at the ongoing G20 Leaders Summit. And this picture was taken yesterday, and that's all on Vanguard newspaper.
On this day newspaper, statement from Peter Mba: knowledge, not assets, at the soul of any successful nation. The writer says governor advocates experiential learning, says Enugu spends 33% of budget on education. Federal government signs contract for Section 1 of Africa's Trans-Sahara Superhighway. Nigeria's debt to World Bank grows to $17 billion. You can start with the details on the front page. The big story on the paper is a statement from President Bola Ahmed Tinubu: Nigeria can't prosper unless every part thrives, says nation must urgently transition to federation defined by order, stability, and safety. Targets tech, agri-creative sector in plan for northern youth. We have a picture where we caption Nigeria Rising, where we can see Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala alongside President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, the First Lady, and the President of African Development Bank. And we also have a picture story where we can see the Senate President alongside the Senate leader, and then the family members, the sons, the wife, and daughter of the deceased member of the House. And that's all the news on this day newspaper.
Right, let's take a look at another paper, which is Daily Independent, where we have CBN warns on fake SWIFT messages vow to persecute climates. You can find detail of that on page 4. NATA petition NCAA over sale of ticket in foreign currency by international airlines. The big story, Tinubu seek National Assembly not to borrow fresh 1.767 trillion naira loan. Wants approval for 2025-2027 MTEF and FSP. Urges amendment to Social Investment Program Act. Detail found in the paper. Not development key to Nigerians' prosperity, says Tinubu. Federal government begins mpox vaccination in 7 states, including the FCT. Ifeanyi free spirit pulled down political ethnic barriers. You can find that story on page 6. EFCC chairman dismisses 2 staff members over corruption allegations. And concerning G20 summit alliance against hunger, poverty, best approach to end scourge coming from Tinubu. Tampolo accuses Navy of sabotaging effort to combat oil theft. You can find out why he said that and what was the conversation like. You can start that on the front page and do continue in the paper. Creative arts technology and new Nigerians crook oil, says Sawolu. You can find that on page 29. We have the picture story of all those who attended the G20, including our president and the Director General of the World Trade Organization. And that's all on Daily Independent newspaper.
On the Guardian newspaper, starting with the first story, which is the big headline 2025 appropriation bill, fiscal hurdle awaits 47.9 trillion naira budget, MDA's mobilization capacity. Now we have an infograph here and there's also a caption that says, while the proposed budget is ambitious, it is essential to implement effective strategies to increase revenue generation. This includes strengthening tax administration, expanding the tax base, and improving tax compliance. By taking these steps, Nigeria can work towards a more sustainable fiscal future. And then we have 19.6 trillion naira oil revenue target. We have 13.07 trillion naira as deficit, and we have 5.7 trillion naira as non-oil tax. And then we have 2.87 trillion naira government-owned enterprises, and we have independent revenue of 3.6 trillion naira and other sources of 4.8 trillion naira. And I remember that the last estimated revenue from the oil, the target for the last budget we have for 2023-2024 was 18 trillion naira thereabout. And it wasn't until the month of October or recently that we had oil reaching 1.8 million barrels per day in production. We've just recorded this once. We are yet to see if we have achieved that in the days that followed ahead. However, it means that we were not able whatsoever to reach 18 trillion naira as expected revenue because, well, the federal government, we are yet to have the report for how much revenue was generated entirely for the year 2024. As we are still in the year, we would have this report for the following year. And the estimation for oil production from the government at that time with the proposed budget was 1.8 million barrels per day. It's only when we are able to produce that amount we would be estimating an 18 trillion naira as revenue, and we were not able to meet that. So automatically it means that for this year 2024 that we didn't meet that 18. Now we are seeing another ambitious target again, Sele, of 19.6 trillion naira for oil revenue, and it's very ambitious. That's just the word for it. And it means in subsequent paper, we will see there are moves for borrowing from the presidency. Again, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu is thinking of borrowing more, means our budget, our debt deficit, and all of that, it will keep increasing. If we will keep having an ambitious budget like this, and nothing is done about generating revenue, I think, I don't have to think about it, it's a fact that we will keep borrowing. And we are not yet where we are. We are not at a consistent 1.8 million barrel oil production daily. We are not there yet. And therefore, we are most likely not going to see 19.6 trillion naira come 2025 as our oil revenue generated for that year, as long as we are not we are not going above, exceeding what we are expecting at the end of the day. And the sad part about our budget is once you fix it, you have to fund it one way or another. You have to fund it. If you say education is taking 10 billion, for example, it means you have put things in place to consume those 10 billion. If you do not fund that 10 billion for education, education is going to suffer, because that is the expectation for that year and all of that. So it means more borrowing. But I'm hoping to see that rather than just putting our budget based on estimate on what we might earn, we should do a budget clearly with what we have and stating clearly where we are going to borrow and what for. We need to change the direction at which we bring out our budget proposal. You can't be assuming you will make this much money when the indicators out there is clear, loud, working against whatever you are assuming and hoping will be at the end of the day.
You know, sometimes Nigerians cannot help but feel like sometimes it feels like the budget is more like saying, okay, let's present a budget so that it doesn't look like we did not have a budget for this coming year.
Sometimes.
Because each time we don't even work with what we have. We saw yesterday about 34 states being left out from the universal basic education funds that and we clearly remember, Rachel, you remember when we were analyzing the 2024 budget, we saw money that was allocated to education, especially to universal basic education.
We did.
And I think the only funds that was not really funded properly was student loan. We didn't really see it being captured that way. But then yet we're seeing education still suffering. We're seeing all of the states not even benefiting from it. So just like you clearly stated, when we have a budget, why don't we work towards what we have? And then I think it will only make Nigerians happy when we begin to work towards getting revenue. In fact, what I'm looking here, even when we realize it's 19.6 trillion, we're looking at more than half of the money going to deficit because we keep funding all of that. And there are other sources that we're seeing. I mean, we are seeing where our vice president as well as Sanwo-Olu talking about the fact that creative art and technology is the new oil. How much have we given? You and I were looking at the new curriculum for school, and we're saying some of this thing does not look like the government is working towards making sure that this coming generation is working towards it. We saw there are no teachers for even coding for these students. So what are we saying? So just like you said, we hope to see them working with what we have in hand and then working towards seeing we have something better. And then maybe we'll be able to have more money to fund the coming year budget eventually.
Still on the Guardian newspaper, social challenges, Tinubu warns of unrest as Zulum decries IDP camp polygamy. On the Guba poll, Ajayi rejects results, vows to take legal action. Senate VP bid bar farewell with glowing tribute. Food insecurity threatens Nigeria's stability future, says minister. Federal government revokes directives relating to NYSC posting restrictions. Falana underscores right to free education, flays errant state government. Tom Polo accuses Navy of aiding oil thieves. The last story on the paper, expansionary budget will worsen inflation, FX crisis, NES warns the federal government. And that's all the news on the Guardian newspaper.
On Nigerian News Direct, we have 2025 budget. Tinubu seek fresh $2.2 billion loan approval from the National Assembly. As economists recommend review of 2025 budget deficit, oil price benchmark. More detail found on page 7. Why repairs on Port Harcourt refinery is yet to be completed, coming from the NNPCL Limited. We're wondering why they're saying that now, with promises starting from July, August, and then we're almost, coming to the end of the year, and then we're seeing them giving us replies on why the Port Harcourt refinery is yet to be completed. Well, you can read why it's yet to be completed on page 9. Zulum Oga others confirm participation in News Direct Award. No money is missing in cabotage vessel financing fund, coming from Namasa. Data found on page 10. Nigeria must diversify export to avoid falling into economic instability again. This is coming from the governor of Lagos State. Osun government demands arrest of police officer over attempted murder of transport official. You can read that on page 22. And that's all on Nigerian News Direct.
On Nigerian Tribune, cholera kills 25 in Sokoto, 15 hospitalized, over 60 on admission in Plateau. Presidency says it has no individual spokesman and will redesignate Dare and Bwala. You can find details on page 4. The big story, Tinubu writes National Assembly seeks approval to borrow 1.77 trillion naira. Transmits 2025 to 2027 medium-term expenditure framework and fiscal policy paper. On Ondo election, PDP candidate rejects result, heads to tribunal. Company Sirika approved for Katsina airport contract not qualified. This is a statement from a witness. Oyebanji Wike approved 70,000 naira minimum wage for Ekiti and FCT workers. We have more states joining in paying the current minimum wage. Appeal court upholds 30 million naira damages against Ondo government and Motekun. Nigeria Economic Society calls for rework of proposed 47.18 trillion naira 2025 budget. The writer says it's lowest in dollar terms since 2018. We have $115.4 dollar expenditure per Nigerian for 2025, too low. Budget deficit exceeds 3% in Fiscal Responsibility Act. You can find details on page 6. We have a picture story where we can see U.S. President Joe Biden together with the African Development Bank President Dr. Akinwumi Adesina at the G20 Leaders Summit, where we can see that the president admires his goatee. And that's all the news on Nigerian Tribune.
Right, let's take a look at another paper, which is the Leadership newspaper. Terrorists attack soldiers in Borno, many fear death. You can read that on page 6. Sheitima senators pay tribute to the late Ifeanyi Uba. You can find that on page 6. Trending, NCAA to sanction airlines for infraction. And then we have money, the numbers here say money banks deposit reach 85.58 trillion naira in the third quarter of the year. Tampolo alleges complicity in oil theft as Navy defends self. You can find that on page 7. Nigeria cannot thrive without prosperous North, coming from the president. The big story, CSO expert kick against 1.767 trillion naira loan request. Question the government's continuous borrowing. Tinubu writes the National Assembly wants MTEF, FSP, and SIPA amended. You can find detail of that on page 4. Nigeria ranks 7 in number of students in the US. We're seeing that, and then the first in Africa. So you can read that on page 7 because the number of Nigerians that are schooling there is actually, increasing. 75 million Nigerians lack access to sanitation service, coming from UNICEF. And then if we look at the number of people that are actually coming down with cholera, we have seen that number in Sokoto. We're seeing that over 60 on admission in Plateau State. And all of this can actually be linked with the fact that some of them don't have safe drinking water. And then with this open defecation, even the water that we have can get contaminated. So please, I hope that the governors will actually take this. We've been complaining about our health sector suffering. We've been complaining about governors not being concerned. We've been complaining about house planning, whereby we don't even have the relevant bodies going to inspect and say, okay, this house, do you have a proper toilet for people to use? And then we all have, we have neighbors that do practice this open defecation, and then especially when it's rainy season, you get irritated stepping out of the house. So I'm looking forward to seeing where the government of Nigeria, the government of the various states will work toward making sure, where we provide safe drinking water. For example, here in Plateau State, I can't remember the last time I actually saw the water board here in the state, providing water. So I'm hoping that they work toward making safe drinking water, especially now that it's a dry season. We know that it will get very difficult for certain areas to be able to have access to water. So I'm looking forward to seeing work towards making sure we have toilets as much as we also have safe drinking water, and then water for people to be able to take care of themselves after using the toilet is very important. Still on leadership newspaper, we have 25 die of cholera, 15 hospitalized in Sokoto. More detail on page 14. We are losing husbands to cult killing. This is coming from Edo women. The women are crying. We still have the picture of Governor Mohammed Enwayahya laying the 2025 government state budget before the State House of Assembly in Gombe. And this happened yesterday. We are starting to see more governors submitting the budget of their state. So you can do well to get the paper in more detail of any of the story that is of interest to you.
On Blueprint newspaper, Wike to pay over 1 billion naira compensation on Kuje road construction. UBA empowers SMEs with wealth management strategies. On CAF semis, TP Mazambe breaks Edo Queen's hearts. The big story, Senate seeks expeditious action for Tinubu's 1.77 trillion naira loan request. President transmits 2025 to 2027 MTEF FSP to National Assembly. Military remains guardian of Nigeria's unity and democracy. We have IBB and Abdul Salami and others making this statement. ICP tracks 610 billion naira projects in 22 states, NDDC, NEDC, others to follow. Core members now eligible to work in bank, oil and gas. CBN warns public on use of fake sweep. Ajayi rejects outcome of under governorship poll, heads to the tribunal. Still the picture where we can see president in attendance of the G20 Rio summit. And that's all the news on Blueprint newspaper.
A New Telegraph newspaper concerning hardship, World Bank, IMF prescription have failed Nigeria and Africa, coming from Gambari, saying Nigeria and Africa needs to define their problems, urge the continent to strengthen its institutions. More detail found in the paper. Federal government to establish National Youth Development Bank. You can read that on page 8. Concerning COP29, Nigeria working toward achieving net zero emission by 2060, coming from the president. Wike saying, I will pay FCT workers 70,000 naira minimum wage and 3 months arrears. Well, I hope that FCT, citizens will be excited with this, looking at the cost of living in the FCT. Tampolo alleges sabotage and fight against crude oil theft. You can read that on page 7 and 29. Sheitima is saying Umba free spirit pulled down political and ethnic barriers. We're still seeing tributes being, said concerning this former House member. Concerning drug trafficking, 10 Nigerians, 90 other foreigners executed in Saudi Arabia. This is a report coming from Amnesty International and then the AFP. Say highest number of foreigners executed in kingdom's history. Court orders federal government to return Nigerians imprisoned in Ethiopia. More detail on page 2 and 29. Concerning Ondo Guber, PDP candidate Ajayi reject result, heads to tribunal. And then we still have the Edo women lamenting, we are losing our husbands and brothers. This is concerning the cult killing. Housing crisis, we have Reps Committee advocate urgent FMPN recapitalization. Farmers, scientists and others urge reps to ban GMO in Nigeria. You can read detail of that on page 3 and 31. Inaccurate data, a stumbling block to aviation growth, coming from NCAA. Nigerians' debt burden to hit 123.437 trillion naira as Tinubu seek 1.767 trillion naira loan. Demand National Assembly endorsement for 2025-2027 MTAF. Transmit social investment bill for passage. Ask Senate to confirm INEC commissioners. More detail on page 4 and 5. Concerning the killing in Borno, where we have 15 soldiers, 40 insurgents killed in renewal attack. You can find that on page 2, 3 and 29. We have a study coming from the World Health Organization that says about 76,000 African women die of cervical cancer annually. So I think for every woman within the age of birth, you do well to check yourself and then make sure you're not at risk of this. More detail found on page 29, and that's all in New Telegraph newspaper.
On the Matrix newspaper, FX transactions, CBN cautions public on the use of fake SWIFT messages. Guardiola agrees 1-year contract extension with Man City. As G20 membership continues to elude Nigeria, South Africa takes over leadership of bloc to prioritize inclusive economic growth, industrialization, employment, and others. Tinubu nominates 3 INEC commissioners for Senate approval. The big story on the paper, fresh terrorist attack, defense headquarters confirms death of 5 soldiers. The writer says attack painful reminder of callousness of Boko Haram insurgents, a statement from Zulum. Terrorists ambush NSCDC team, 7 officials missing. Troops, armed forces of Nigeria shall not be deterred. This is the defense headquarters assuring Nigerians. Tinubu seeks National Assembly's approval for 1.77 trillion naira loan. Senate holds valedictory session for late Senator Fayuba. Ahead of Agege chairmanship election, Akinyemi calls for open debate. You can find details on page 3. And we have an entertainment story. Adesina returns to Nigeria after historic Miss Universe achievement. We have a picture. We can see the Lagos State Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu presented with a portrait of himself after delivering the 36th convocation lecture at the Yaba College of Technology on the theme developing export alternatives for Nigeria's economic recovery. This happened yesterday, and that's all the news on the Matrix newspaper.
On Daily Times newspaper, Senate raised alarm as Auditor General report uncovers 105.6 billion naira fraud in the MDAs. More data found in the paper. Senate hold validatory session for late Senator Ifeanyi Uba. And we have Tinubu submit 2025 budget to National Assembly for approval. So we look forward to seeing the allocation being given to various sectors and which sector will suffer during this budget presentation. Reno Moke under fire for Yahoo girl remark on Pastor Becky Eneche. Details found on page 3. Tinubu seeks Senate approval for 1.767 trillion naira external borrowing plan. The big story, INEC promotes 1,731 staff, reinforces commitment to career development. Detail found on page 5. Senator Mrs. Okedibo seat was earned, not allocated, as falsely claimed by Senator Ndume. You can find that story in the paper. Tinubu seeks Senate confirmation of INEC commissioners. Detail found on page 9. We have the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty, which was what was being discussed during the G20 meeting in Brazil. You can do well to get the paper in more detail of any of the story that is of interest to you.
On Thursday's newspaper, Nigeria cannot prosper without thriving, not a statement from President Tinubu. Court orders federal government to repatriate Nigerians detained in Ethiopia. Edo Assembly approves Governor Pueblo's request for 20 advisors. Wike approves 70,000 naira minimum wage for FCT workers. PDP's Ajayi rejects Ondo election result held to tribunal. The big story on the paper, Tinubu's 1.767 trillion naira loan bid raises alarm over Nigeria's debt burden. Federal government reshapes NYSC postings. Private sector now open for core members. Canada extends work hours for international students. Senate pays tribute to late Senator Ifeanyi, and we have a picture where we can see Governor Doi Diri alongside Deputy Governor and Senator Lawrence inaugurates 15 new permanent secretaries on Tuesday, November 19, urging integrity, accountability, and commitment to Bielsa's development under the Assured Prosperity Agenda. And these are the major headlines on First News newspaper.
A look at Nature newspaper. COP29 Nigerian president reaffirms commitment to global climate action. Data found on the front page and continue on page 3. We have Democratic Republic of Congo suffers power outages as plastic waste blocks major hydroelectric dam. And that's why we've been saying that they have been a call to eradicate the use of plastics because they are really causing problems. The big story on the paper, AU GCF launched $260 million water investment fund for African countries. Minister tax engineers on solution to climate change and food security. And then we have the WTD 2024 Nature News finalists highlight sanitation needs in conflict zones. African Development Bank unlocks Africa's food security with $1 billion resilient support to 13 million farmers. CAMIC seeks social equity, environmental justice in Africa. UNICEF celebrates Kano State Openification free milestone. You can read detail of that on page 7. And we have other stories as well on the front page of the paper. So do well to get the paper in more detail of any of the story that is of interest to you.
On Point Sport Extra, better than Haaland or Osimhen, best striker in Europe. If you want to know who's making that statement, you can find details on page 7. Look who's been nominated again. Ekong admits Eagles set-piece problem. I can't wait for World Cup qualifiers, Iheanacho is saying. You can find details on page 7. 3 EPL clubs won Van Nistelrooy. You can find details on page 4. NWFL Championship, CAP WCL title hope ends. PSG bid 250 million euros for Yamal. Chelsea keen on Kelleher. You can find details on page 5. Hendrick emerges shock Southampton target. Hopper's coach serves tough NPBL title defense. England can will walk up under Tuchel. This is a statement from Castley. You can find details on page 8, and we have to wait and see. Federer pens emotional tribute to Nadal. You can find details on page 8. The big story is captioned Wingless. Super Eagles form raises AFCON World Cup qualifiers concern. Guavon bemoans lack of creativity, and that's all the news on Point Sports Extra.
Business Day newspaper. Investors strike gold as shock up like stock. I take that. Investors strike gold as stock up 264% in 5 years. We have the NGS beat South Africa and Kenya market, so you can look at what the stock is like. Start reading on the front page and continue on page 31. Nigerians' life expectancy stagnates on decade-long underinvestment. Court allows virtual evidence in 108 billion naira employees sued against Total Energies. Nigerian quest to double oil output face crook reality as the FPSO operate less than 50% capacity. Trump affects U.S. property market reborn. You can find out on page 30. We still have this picture story. I believe this is during the meeting in Brazil where we can see the World Trade Organization director and also talking with other people how they can further strengthen multilateral trading system and then update its rules to deal with the 21st century issues. And this talk was going on with the president of China rather. So you can do well to get the paper in more detail of stories of interest to you.
On the Sporting Sun newspaper, Bayern proposes 25 million euros a year Musiala's wages. You can find details at the back page. Kane hoping to extend England career beyond 2026 World Cup. Federer opens emotional letter to Nadal before retirement. You can find details on the back page. Eguavon links Wabley's tragedy to Super Eagles' struggle. Man City gives Guardiola deadline over new contract. PSG tables $211 million for Yamal. Barca rejects the bid. Neymar plays down Santos' return. You can find details inside. Militao undergoes successful surgery. Arsenal offers 90 million euros for Rafinha. You can find details inside the paper. And we have Napoli rejects Gala's 25 million euros, 50 million euros, 3 installments offer for Osimhen. We have the six stars bleed race for Gift Orban. Kelechi admits struggles with Sevilla. Holyfield calls out Mike Tyson for trilogy fight. You can find details at the back page. And the big story on the paper, Lookman nominated for Best Striker Award in Italy. As PSG renews interest in him, Atlanta works on contract extension. And that's all the news on Sporting Sun newspaper.
And that's how far we can go on the program today. Thank you so much for keeping a date with us. We look forward again to doing this together tomorrow. So please do have a lovely day ahead.